Okay, well, it's a few minutes after 10 o'clock. We've got about 15 people on the line, so thank you for joining us and welcome. This is the third of three online application workshops that we're doing for the 2021 request for proposals for SNEP Watershed Grants. I'm Tom Ardito with Restore America's Estuaries. I'm going to share my screen here. And let me say up front, if you have any questions or comments, just type them into the chat box for now. I'll go through the presentation, which is an hour, a little bit less probably. And then I'll address any questions that are in the chat box. And then I'll ask you to, if anybody wants to turn on their microphone at that point, and ask a question or have a conversation, we can do that. I'll stick around for as long as it takes. I've blocked out 2 hours. This will not take that long. The other ones we've done take an hour and 15, something like that. So again, welcome to the 2021 SNEP Watershed Grants application workshop. I'm Tom Ardito with Restore America's Estuaries. Let's see if I can get my slideshow to work. There we go. Let me tell you a little bit about Restore America's Estuaries, first of all. We're a nonprofit organization, a 501c3, but we're a network of coastal conservation organizations from around the country. I'm sure most of you are probably familiar with Save the Bay here in Providence, Rhode Island, which is the only network organization that's within the Southeast New England region. The Southeast New England program is a federal funding program that's been managed by EPA since 2014. We have a cooperative agreement with EPA to manage the Watershed Grants program under the larger Southeast New England program. And here you can see the vision and goals of the program taken from the new strategic plan that EPA just published this year for the Southeast New England program. The vision and the goals are kind of overlapping. So I think if you just look at the bullets on the goals there, a resilient ecosystem of safe and healthy waters, thriving watersheds and natural lands, and sustainable communities. Those are the goals of the Southeast New England program, and by extension, the goals of the grant program. So I look at the Southeast New England program grants, watershed grants, as one of the main ways of implementing the vision and goals of the Southeast New England program. This is the region, for those of you who are unfamiliar with it. Every project that we fund takes place within this region. The applicants on the grants and the recipients of the grants don't necessarily need to be located within the region, but the work does. The region includes pretty much all of Rhode Island, as you can see, and much of Southeast Massachusetts. It's defined on a watershed basis. So you can think of it as all the watersheds that drain to the area in between Cape Cod and Long Island Sound. That includes the Narragansett Bay watershed. So that's why our funding area extends as far north as Worcester and Brockton, Mass. It includes the Buzzards Bay watershed. It includes the Taunton River watershed, which is part of the Narragansett Bay watershed. It includes the south shore of Cape Cod, essentially, as you can see from this map, out to Chatham. And the Pleasant Bay watershed is the easternmost area of our region. It includes all of the offshore islands of Rhode Island and southeastern Massachusetts, so Nantucket, Martha's Vineyard, the Elizabeth Islands, Block Island, and the islands of Narragansett Bay, obviously. And it also includes the south shore of Rhode Island, all the way to the Rhode Island border in the southwest corner of the state. And I should say, if you go on our website or link from the RFP, you can access an interactive map, an interactive version of this map on GIS. So, and it's very easy to use. You don't need GIS software to use it. So If you're contemplating a project and you're not 100% sure whether or not it's on the watershed boundary, you can access that interactive map and zoom right in to see. The other thing I'll say is that since the program is defined by watershed boundaries, and municipal boundaries don't necessarily, well, almost never coincide with watershed boundaries, we recognize that if a project's happening in a municipality that's right on the border, or maybe a multi-municipality project, that kind of thing, we recognize the need sometimes to stray over the border a little bit, the border of the region. But again, the impact of the project has to be primarily in the Southeast New England program region. So these are the priorities of the SNEP program as established by that strategic plan I mentioned earlier that EPA recently published. Increasing local capacity, increasing available solutions, ensuring diverse representation, demonstrating ways to address common challenges, and increasing community leaders' understanding of the benefit of restoration projects. So you could think of this as kind of the ways in which we, the methods, if you will, by which we try to implement that vision and goals that I presented earlier. And again, these are in the SNEP strategic plan that you can access either via the resource pages on our website, which is snepgrants.org, or you can link right out of our request for proposals to the SNEP strategic plan. And I really strongly encourage you, if you're considering applying to this program, you should take a look at that SNEP strategic plan, because that's really the foundation that we're working off of for the grants program. So as I mentioned, SNEP has been in existence since 2014. Restore America's Estuaries, or RAE, has had a cooperative agreement with EPA since 2017. And EPA did quite a bit of grant making under the program prior to RAE's involvement. But when we became involved, we developed the Watershed Grants program as it is today in cooperation with EPA. And we work to administer it in cooperation with EPA. So we've had 3 grant rounds so far, 28 annual grant rounds, 2018, 19, 20, competitive. And you can see the statistics here that we've awarded 38 grants so far. Since most of them are partnership projects, the number of grantees is much larger than that. I didn't actually count them all, but it's much more than 100. And we've awarded $8.6 million. But as you can see with the match, the impact has been larger than that. And I'll talk a little bit more about the match in a minute. Typically, our grants are in the $100,000 to $400,000 range is the majority of our awards. We will fund smaller or larger than that under special circumstances, which I'll talk about a little bit in a minute. Here's a map that simply shows you the locations of the awards we've made so far under this grant. And if you go on our website, snepgrants.org, you can click on these little pins, and that will bring up information on each of these projects. So you can also just see a list of the projects we funded. So that's a really good way to get a feel for what this program has funded in the past. Not to say that we wouldn't fund a project type that we haven't funded in the past, because we certainly would. But that's with any grant program, that's a good way to get a sense of what their priorities are, is to look at what they've funded in the past. And you can certainly do that on our website. So these are the purpose and the goals of the grants from the RFP, the request for proposals. It's out now. And we developed these goals from the strategic plan. So this is kind of drilling down a little bit into what the grants are designed to do. And I wouldn't say that, well, with the exception of the top bullet, the projects that we fund won't necessarily achieve all of these goals, but I think everything we fund will achieve at the very least but in most cases, several or many of these goals. So, the overall purpose, as I said, is to restore ecosystems and improve communities, which we see as kind of an integrated goal that ideally the projects that we fund, by doing one, are doing the other. Restoring clean water and particularly managing nutrients has always been a primary objective of the SNEP program since it was established, and it is today. Restoring ecosystem functions and values, which can overlap quite a bit with the first one, obviously. We like to fund projects that build capacity, and that can take a number of different forms. Maybe it's an innovative technology and it's building technical capacity in that way. Maybe it's putting together a new partnership, and that's building institutional capacity. Maybe it's establishing a new program within an existing organization, and that would be programmatic capacity. But our goal is not just to fund projects that have a limited impact during the time of the grant, but that increase the ability of all of us in the region to address the problems of that are identified by the strategic plan. We really like to foster and support partnerships, whether they're existing partnerships or new ones. And the majority of the projects, the grants that we fund, are partnership-based projects, and those can take all different kinds of forms. They can be multi-municipality, they can be a municipality working with a nonprofit, they can be nonprofits working together, they can be a university, sometimes different universities working together, or a university working with a nonprofit. Whatever permutation of partnership you can imagine, we'll fund it. We really like to support innovative technologies. An example of that would be the permeable reactive barriers we've funded up on Cape Cod and Martha's Vineyard, and other approaches that may be new ways of solving old problems. We hope that all of the grants that we fund foster regional learning. And by that, I mean, we hope that the experience of the projects that we fund are communicated and conveyed throughout the region, whether they're successful or whether they hit challenges that people should know about. Either way, it can really add to our ability to improve what we do and address the challenges of the region. And we, within the grants program, offer some opportunities for doing that by bringing grantees together and by encouraging grantees to participate in both the Coastal Restoration Summit that Restore America's Estuaries sponsors, as well as other professional conferences and that kind of thing. But we also encourage all of our grantees to incorporate outreach into their projects that fosters this kind of learning and conveying the information. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. New over the last couple of years is working with something called the SNEP Network, which is another aspect or another program within the overall Southeast New England program. And at the very end of this presentation, I'll talk a little bit more about that. We'd like to support diverse communities, organizations, and projects, and that means both, reaching out to underrepresented areas, but it also just means geographic diversity within the region. It's, as you saw from the map slide, it's a pretty big region, and we like to fund projects throughout the region in both Rhode Island and Massachusetts. We also like to fund different kinds of projects. Our goal is not to, just fund academic institutions or just fund stormwater projects. We try to build a portfolio of projects in order to demonstrate all different kinds of approaches to solving problems in all different kinds of areas and different kinds of problems that the region is facing. And we like to fund different kinds of organizations because, you know, again, it's a cross-cutting program, and those partnerships and the work that we do will have the most impact if it's if the work that we're supporting is taking place within and between, you know, the different sectors that work on coastal ecosystems in New England. So again, nonprofits, academic institutions, municipalities. We really like to fund and support the work of municipalities, since municipalities bear so much of the responsibility for water quality management now. State agencies, and I'll talk a little bit more about eligibility and that sort of thing. And we like to fund holistic approaches. So no matter what your project is, I always encourage people to try to give us the bigger picture. So if you're doing a dam removal, you know, a primary goal may be to allow migratory fish to get up the river, but it probably has, well, not probably, it will definitely have impacts on water quality. It will have impacts on wetlands. It will have impacts on the community, maybe recreation, maybe aesthetics, maybe economics. So in developing your project, you know, think about what those impacts are. And to the extent that projects are designed to take advantage of those synergies and have the broadest benefit, those are the projects that we really like to fund. And again, drilling down a little further on some of the projects that we funded over the last 3 years, this is not comprehensive, but I think the majority of projects we funded definitely fall into one of these categories. Watershed scale estuarine restoration, a good example of this is the Pleasant Bay Alliance out in Chatham area on Cape Cod, that eastern end of our region that I showed you on the map. And here, 4 municipalities are working together. They were able to develop the first multi-municipality water quality permit with the state, with DEP, Mass DEP, which is also a partner on the project. And they're working together to reduce nutrients and restore water quality in Pleasant Bay, which is the largest estuary on Cape Cod. And, you know, it's a really innovative project because the towns are working so closely together, and they're working with nonprofits as well, and technical institutions as well. So Green Streets and Neighborhoods, we've funded the Pine Street project in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, which is connected to the new train station development. So that's, you know, ripping up pavement and putting in stormwater plantings and that sort of thing, and bike lanes, and improving the amenity value as well as the water quality impacts of an urban street. We've funded quite a bit of work along the Woonasquatucket River in Providence, which similarly is a, you know, bikeway development coupled with river restoration and riverbank restoration and stormwater management to both provide, you know, improve the recreational and amenity value of the river for a low-income community in Providence and some adjacent towns as well, along with water quality benefits. There's also actually some of the work along the Woonasquatucket also has job training aspects to it. We funded Groundworks Rhode Island, which involves people who are coming out of incarceration, as well as you know, other folks in job training programs to learn green landscaping techniques that are used, you know, for stormwater development and that kind of thing. We funded the Providence Stormwater Innovation Center at Roger Williams Park, which is doing, in addition to installing stormwater controls in Roger Williams Park, Providence also does demonstrations and trainings, workshops on maintenance of stormwater management practices and that kind of thing. We've funded some river and wetland restoration. We're funding up on the Childs River in Falmouth, Mass. That's both a river restoration and a cranberry bog wetland restoration, where a series of former cranberry bogs that have gone out of production are being restored into a natural freshwater wetland and riverine system. I talked a little bit about some of the innovative technologies we like to fund. Often those take the form of a pilot project that's testing the technology, and that includes permeable reactive barriers, bioreactors, and innovative approaches to septic systems. We have in the past funded a fair amount of applied ecosystem research and monitoring and some data management, including, I'm sure some of you are familiar with the comprehensive water resources database that Cape Cod Commission is developing right now, which we were a principal funder of. This year, it's a little different. I'll talk about that in just a minute. We like to see watershed and regional planning as part of our projects, whether it's something that we're funding or whether it's something that the projects that we're funding are built on. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but we do feel that in general planning, watershed planning, it is the foundation for good work to restore water quality and ecosystems. And then we fund a certain number of conferences and technology transfer forums. That's when I said there were exceptions to the $100,000 to $400,000 funding range that's typical for our grants. That's one of them. And so we don't generally fund smaller grants, but this is one of the exceptions. If there's a need, because we recognize there's a need sometimes for a professional conference or a public, maybe an event for stakeholders, that kind of thing, that can be hard to fund. And so if you just, for example, want to bring people together to talk about salt marsh restoration in southeastern Massachusetts, we could fund a conference like that, or again, a public event. The one other instance where we'll provide smaller grants, or two other instances actually. One is if there's a larger project that just needs a little bit of money to complete its funding, we would consider chipping in a smaller amount of money. And then another example is if it's something that really is best tested at a pilot scale. Maybe you're doing a tiny little pilot project on an innovative wetland practice or something like that, and it doesn't make sense to fund it at $150,000, but for $20,000 you can test it. We would consider funding an application like that. So I said I'd talk a little bit more about the kinds of organizations we fund, and you can read the bullets on the left for yourself, but I'll say that basically any organization is eligible except for federal agencies and for-profit companies, although both of those can be partners on projects. But in terms of being the actual applicant and grantee, these organizations or types of organizations on the left are typically the ones that we fund. And if you look at the column on the right, that's not by any means a comprehensive list of the organizations that we funded, but it's quite a few of them. And give you an idea that we've funded a lot of nonprofits, a few state agencies, a few regional planning organizations. There aren't really that many in our region, so I think we probably funded all of them. Academic institutions, again, quite a few municipalities, and we have funded a few unincorporated organizations, but typically they'll partner with a 501c3 or some other incorporated organization that can serve as the fiscal agent. So for example, the Friends of Bass River is, well, they're either unincorporated or a very small 501c3, but they partnered with the Cape Cod Foundation. So the Cape Cod Foundation is actually the grant recipient. Friends of Bass River are doing the work, and that's certainly something that is doable. For 2021, we have 1.75 million available, which unfortunately is a little less than we've had over the past few years. But it's enough, I believe, to make a big impact on the region again this year. And for those of you who are familiar with the program or maybe past applicants or recipients, we have a few changes for this year. The first, and maybe the most important, is that since EPA has a new strategic plan for the SNEP region, we have tied the goals of the grants program back to the strategic plan. So it doesn't really substantially change the work of the program, but it's a nice way to understand what we're trying to do. And again, I'd encourage you to check out that strategic plan when you get a chance. We've tried to make the application process as easy as possible this year for applicants, and to try to broaden the accessibility of the program. And two of the primary ways we've done that is first going to a true letter of intent format for the first application step. So it's a very simple form to fill out. And from that letter of intent, we'll select the organizations from whom we'll invite full proposals. So it's a two-step process, but beginning with a very easy letter of intent. And the full proposal isn't bad either, as these things go, but the LOI is really easy. And we have a new online portal. So you can log on, you just link there from snepgrants.org, create a profile, and then you can develop applications. You can work on them, you can save them. You can submit up to 5, so you could be working on 5 applications at once. Make whatever changes you like until you hit the submit button. The deadline is April 16th. We'll talk about that in a minute for the letters of intent. We're broadening our review committee. We're bringing in some other partners and also broadening it geographically to make sure the region is well represented. We're coordinating with the SNEP network, which again, I'll address at the end of the presentation. We're working harder to reach out to underrepresented communities throughout the region. Habitat and coastal resilience have always been, at least since Ray has been involved with this program, have always been eligible purposes for these funds, but we're working harder to reach out to the habitat community and the coastal resilience community and hopefully solicit more of those kinds of proposals. And we have funded those kinds of proposals in the past, but we'd like to see more of them. We're providing more support for applicants and grantees through the process. These workshops, the pre-application workshops like I'm doing now, we've done every year, but this year we're going to do a full proposal workshop as well, or several, so that for the organizations from whom we've invited full proposals, we'll also work with them to help them provide information and help where we can for them to develop full proposals. I alluded to this a little earlier. This year, we are not funding broad, ambient environmental monitoring or broad environmental research. And the reason for that is that our funding is tight this year, and EPA is funding a lot of monitoring and research with SNEP dollars, but elsewhere than this grants program. So we decided to separate that out for this year. In the future, we'll reconsider that, and it's likely we've funded those things in the past. It's likely we'll fund them in the future, but for this year, we're not funding those. I will say that It doesn't mean that no monitoring will be funded, because we encourage performance monitoring related to the projects that we do fund. So if monitoring or research is closely tied to a proposal that is not solely for that purpose, then or performance monitoring around SNEP projects, either current or former SNEP funded projects, we'll consider those. But for example, in prior years, actually both last year and 2018, we funded continuous water quality monitoring buoys for Narragansett Bay and Mount Hope Bay. That kind of stuff we're not going to be funding this year. And then last, again, for this year, because we have a little flexibility with the match, because of the nature of our cooperative agreement, our funding agreement with EPA, we have some flexibility on the non-federal match. And so if organizations are finding that the match requirement, which I'll talk about in a sec, is a barrier to application or participation in the program, then you can request either a full or a partial waiver of the non-federal match requirement, and we'll consider that. Here's the award calendar. We are at the third of the virtual letter of intent workshops. And as I mentioned, the deadline for submittal of an LOI is April 16th at 4 p.m. The portal, the online portal gate comes down, and that's the end of that. So I would encourage you, even though it's a really easy process, I would definitely encourage you to get your application started sooner rather than later. So, I mean, the reality of these things is the applications tend to flood in at the very end, and I get it, but familiarize yourself with the portal. Remember that it's a brand new portal for us. So I've beta tested it. I think it's at 100% right now, but give yourself some time and give us some time, and try to get at least started on it sooner rather than later, I would suggest. We'll review those letters of intent, and by May 17th at the latest, we'll notify the organizations from whom we're requesting full proposals, as well as those from whom we're not. And that full proposal will be due July 2nd. We'll notify the awardees by August 16th at the latest. And that gives us time to start working on contracts in August, grant agreements. And then we always have a big announcement event or two announcement events in September. Fingers crossed that'll be in person this year. It was in person until last year, and then we had to obviously do it virtually. These are some observations I have about the kinds of projects we've funded over the last 3 years of running this program. I mean, obviously, everything we fund in one way or another is going to support those SNEP vision goals and priorities. We're looking for projects that have a significant positive impact, not just a little impact. And I always say to people that even if your project has a small footprint geographically, it can have a big impact through the communication aspects, again, sharing knowledge or demonstrating approaches. I also, another important point about this is one failing a lot of times, I think, in applications is that people send us a proposal to do a project, and it kind of ignores the area upstream and downstream. But I think for the kind of projects that we fund, they almost always have an impact upstream, downstream, and on the community. So let us know what that impact is. Think about it, figure out what it is, and let us know. And that's a way in which you can communicate the impact, the significance of the impact of the work that you're doing. Most of the projects we fund, if not all of them, have a connection to water quality, but at the same time, they're holistic. And I talked a little bit about that with the dam removal example. But, no matter what you're doing, think about how it affects water quality and think about how it affects everything else. Again, we much prefer to support partnership projects. I think if not everything we funded, certainly the vast majority of the grants we funded were partnerships in one way or another. And the stronger and more sustainable those partnerships are, the more competitive your proposal will be. I talked about local and regional capacity, and I talked about the different forms that that can take, but certainly think about that in developing your proposal. And I talked about regional learning and expertise, and those are really important aspects as well. I think every proposal should have a strong outreach component, and depending on the nature of the project, that might be outreach for general audience, it might be outreach for technical audience, or it might be both. So think about, who needs to know about the project, whether it's local stakeholders, whether it's municipal leaders, whether it's practitioners in the field, and try to design your project so that the word gets out about the results of the project. We really like it when communities are informed, stakeholders know about what's going on, and we really like it when community leaders, whether those municipal leaders or others, are informed about the project, or better yet, engaged in the project. And then this understanding of implementation bullet is really important, because we get a lot of proposals that, particularly if they're for planning projects, that maybe like really, especially now that, a lot of people are getting really heavy into GIS-based watershed plans and that kind of thing. They may be like really cool plans and really, really interesting, but the applicants don't have a very good idea of how that plan is going to translate into actual work on the ground. And at the end of the day, we recognize that the projects we fund may not have an immediate environmental impact. You may be developing, a plan. You may be doing design and engineering for an installation. You may be doing, for example, a review of municipal ordinances to look at how they can be improved for water quality management. I mean, there's a million things you might be doing that doesn't have an immediate environmental impact. But everything we fund should be aimed towards ultimately improving the quality of the environment in the Southeast New England region. And if it's not a construction project or something that has an immediate impact within the period of the grant, then you should think hard about how the work that you're doing is going to translate into that impact. Because, I mean, those of us who worked in this field for a while know that, the shelves of town halls are filled with awesome plans that were never implemented. And this program has no interest in funding those. I think I've covered a little bit of this, but I think as you're putting together proposals, think about this. Think about the need that your project is meeting, and how is it identified, and why this need, and how is your project addressing this particular need. Again, if there's a regional or a watershed plan, tap into it, or don't. I mean, if there may be a watershed plan and you're doing work that is not covered by the plan, and there may be a good reason for that, but tell us that, because the folks who are on the review committee are really knowledgeable about water quality, habitats, coastal ecosystems throughout the region. And if work comes to us and it seems to overlap with an existing plan, but it doesn't even mention that plan, then we wonder what's going on. Why didn't you look at this plan? If you looked at it and there's a reason not to implement it with the work that you're doing, then just tell us what that is, and we'll consider it. Similarly, municipal vulnerability or coastal resilience plans are often good foundations for the work that we fund. I've talked about partnerships. Community commitment is really important. You see a lot of applications for projects where they sort of waive at the involvement of the municipality, but there's nothing in the proposal that shows that the municipality is really committed in any kind of meaningful way. And those of us who've worked a lot with municipalities know that, you know, not to put too fine a point on it, but talk is cheap. And if it's on municipal property, or if it relates to municipal, town roads, that kind of thing, we want to see that the municipality is serious about implementing the work. And similarly, if stakeholders are engaged, if there's, local watershed organizations, that kind of thing, that means a lot with a project. It means that a project is likely to be sustainable and have some legs in terms of getting implemented. And then you're going to have to think about non-federal match. And the requirement for this program is 33% of the award amount, non-federal. Again, we can waive that if there's a demonstrated need. So let us know if that's the case. And the type of match that we accept is, very flexible. So we'll accept staff time, volunteer hours, equipment time. There's a lot of flexibility around that in addition to good old fashioned cash match, but it is something that needs to be considered, and it does have to be non-federal. So the one exception to that is federal funds are generally not eligible, although there's certain federal programs like NRCS, Natural Resources Conservation Service, that they have a special, I think Congress in the agriculture bill has specifically said that their funds are matchable to other federal grants. So there are a few exceptions to that, and if you think you have one, let me know. But by and large, federal funds are not matchable. That doesn't mean that federal organizations can't partner, and it doesn't mean that federal funds can't be used in a way that leverages these projects. And so that's actually not uncommon for projects that we fund. For example, perhaps we provide a grant and then non-federal funding is provided as match for our grant, but then there may be another federal source of funding that's also funding the project, and it's just not matched against our grant dollars. Here's just a few things to be careful of when you're developing an application that are likely to reduce the competitiveness of your application. I talked about proposals that are not well connected to the ultimate implementation and ultimate improvement of the environment of Southeast New England. So beware of that. The second bullet is really kind of another way of saying the same thing. The third bullet I also address. So projects that, if there's an existing watershed plan or something like that that just seems to be ignored by a proposal, then we'll wonder what's going on with that, or other ongoing initiatives. And similarly, proposals that overlook partnership opportunities, where there's clear opportunity to partner with somebody else who may be doing similar work, or maybe have expertise in the area that you're working in. We'll wonder about that. And then this last bullet is something we see once in a while, which is when there'll be 2 or 3 very similar proposals within a small geographic area. And if that's it's something that reduces the competitiveness of proposal, obviously, because we're not likely going to fund 3 very similar stormwater management projects by 3 different organizations in the same town. And we will provide feedback following the letters of intent. So sometimes you may not know that somebody else submitted a similar proposal, but we do. And we'll let you know that after the letter of intent. So if, there may be opportunities sometimes, and this has happened in the past, where a couple of organizations submitted letters of intent that for kind of similar programs, and we encouraged them to get it together for a full proposal, and they did. So, so that can happen too. In submitting your application, your letter of intent in this case, even though we have this fancy new online portal, make sure you read the RFP first, because there's a lot that's not covered in the online portal. You know, there's sort of instructions in how to submit the application, but all the background information on the program is not online, in the portal. You can access it all at snepgrants.org. So read that RFP before you get started on your online application. We fund on a reimbursable basis, which means normally you incur the expense and then we reimburse, and we can do that up to once a month. I already talked about 33% non-federal match being required. The longest grant will fund is about 2.5 years. It's actually, I think, about 29 months, something like that, for the performance period, not counting the reporting. But of course, if you have a project that gets done quicker, we'll fund that and close down the grant sooner. We require semi-annual reports, and we require a final report. And I always encourage the grantees, and this is written right into our contract, our grant agreement, I should say, that the final report is written in a way that it has communicates not just to me as the project officer, but that anybody who's interested in the project can pick it up. It has an executive summary and learn about the project that you did from this final report. Because these are EPA funds, most of our grants require quality assurance performance plans, or QAPs. And these are plans that, you know, just like the name implies, assure the quality of environmental data and the use of environmental data in our projects. And it's not just for data acquisition, it's also for things like developing models and even, you know, designing, design and engineering. I think even survey work can be covered by them. So by and large, almost, you know, the majority of the projects we fund require these QAPs, and they need to be done up front. You're supposed to have a QAP in place approved by EPA prior to the acquisition or use of environmental data in these projects. We have a technical support contractor. It's VHB out of Providence, which is a really good consulting firm that we retain to help grantees in terms of planning. They won't write your QAP for you, but they'll help you, figure out what you need to do, and they'll help coordinate the submittal to EPA so we can get these things approved expeditiously. And they've worked out really well, and they've been a big help to our grantees. These QAPs, you can either write them in-house, or you can hire somebody to write them for you. And typically a good environmental consulting firm can develop these things. I always encourage people, if it's something you're unfamiliar with and you haven't done it before, you're probably best off to just write a line into the grant under contractual to hire a consulting firm to do this for you and get it out of the way, and check that box so you can get on with your project. And I can help you if you have a project and you don't know how much a QAP might cost and you want a budget for it, then just give me a call, shoot me an email. I can help you, because we've seen a lot of these at this point, and can usually, once I know how complicated the project is, can usually help you come up with a ballpark number to put in your application budget to cover QAP development. The two categories of projects that we fund that usually don't need to have QAPs developed are the ones that already have QAPs, because sometimes we're funding, essentially part of a continuing program that already has a QAP in place, an approved QAP. And then if it's like a professional conference or something like that, that's not using environmental data, but simply reporting information, then those typically don't require a QAP. Because these are federal dollars, there are all the kind of usual federal funding requirements apply to them. And those of you who've worked on federal grants before will not be the least surprised by any of them. But there's things like, there are small purchase thresholds above which contracts need to be competed, and minority business and women-owned business reporting requirements and that sort of thing. So just take a look at the RFP, and most of those should be covered in there. You can develop applications over several cycles, in the sense that if you submit an application and we decline to fund it, or if you've submitted one in the past that we declined to fund, don't despair. A lot of people have gotten funded under this program who didn't get funded on their first try, and we often see that applications are improved as a result of the feedback that applicants have gotten through this program. The other thing is, we have often funded projects that maybe that may have received an earlier stage funding from Southeast New England program, or may hope to be getting later stage funding from Southeast New England program. We don't have any sort of preference for projects that have been prior funded or not prior funded, but we just look at them in the mix of everything that comes in during the year. But we're certainly open to funding continuing projects of different kinds. And Restore America's Estuaries can provide assistance in developing your application. I can't give you any inside information that's going to give you a secret key to getting funded, but I can certainly provide information that I would provide to anybody else, and help you frame a project, that kind of thing. And this is my last slide, and I told you I would talk about the SNEP network, and this is kind of a newer initiative than the Watershed Grants program, which EPA is also funding under the broader Southeast New England program. And this is a group of folks. It's managed out of the University of Maine, but it includes some consultants here in the SNEP region, and their purpose is to provide training and technical assistance and capacity building. So you could think of, in terms of implementing that vision and goals of the SNEP program, you could think of the SNEP Watershed Grants program as kind of the main funding vehicle to implement those vision and goals. And you could think of the network as kind of the main technical assistance vehicle. And they also have some engineering consultants on board that they can actually pay the engineering consultants to provide technical assistance to communities and nonprofits. So we would like to see, and the network's a little bit newer than the Watershed Grants program. So we have worked with them, and there has been some coordination on projects, between our funding and their technical assistance, but it's kind of a new thing. So we would like to see more of it. And, the two ways that this can happen is you might reach out to the SNEP network for assistance in developing a project, and then you could write a grant application to us to fund implementation of the project. Or conversely, we might fund development of a program or something like that, and then the network will get involved in helping to implement it. So that happened in the case of the Providence Stormwater Innovation Center, which I mentioned earlier at Roger Williams Park, where we funded the development of that center with a SNEP grant a couple of years ago. And since then, the network has gotten involved and is working with the Innovation Center, in their delivery of training and that sort of thing. You can just go to this website, www.snepnetwork.org, and you can contact them, for assistance, or certainly feel free to contact me to talk about how, we might meld those two programs as it were. So that's it for my presentation. You can see here, once again, the website where you can get anything you need related to this application, and you can link to the online portal. You can see my email, and you should feel free to contact me if I can provide additional information. You should definitely Google SNEP strategic plan, or just link to the strategic plan from our RFP or our website, and check that out if you're interested in applying to this program. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen and pull up the chat box and see what we have for questions. So Casey Danhauser is asking, would submitting 2 separate LOIs for 2 distinct projects in the same community be considered unnecessary competition? Should we choose just one project to submit? I mean, no, you should feel free to submit 2. I was really, when I was talking about unnecessary competition, I was more thinking of when there's 2 organizations. I mean, in this case, obviously, or I shouldn't say obviously, but I think it'd be very unlikely that we would ultimately fund both of them. But if you have 2 different ideas for 2 different projects and you want to submit them both, I think that's great. You know, we'll take a look at both of them. And then Michelle West has another question, which is, if a project is designed already and funding is requested for implementation only, as well as outreach, et cetera, would a QAP be required? I think we need more information to address that question. My guess is probably not, but why don't you contact me separately, and we can dig into that a little more deeply. It looks like those are the only, oh, there's another, I missed the first chat question, which is from Robert Griffin. Could you share where those EPA funding opportunities are for research? It seems like there is lots of funding for coastal restoration. NIFWIP funds hundreds of millions per year for this, but limited funding for research on ecosystems, ecosystem service values. Yeah, why don't you shoot me an email, and I can connect you certainly with some folks at EPA who would know about other EPA sources. I mean, of course, the obvious other source of funding is NSF, which you know, I don't pretend to be an expert on, but and I know NOAA, you know, if you're talking about evaluation and that kind of thing, I know NOAA funds some of that too. I don't know a lot about those programs, but feel free to send me an email and we can have a conversation. I can do my best to point you in the right direction. And I think that's it for the chat box. Would anybody like to just turn on their microphone and if you have any additional, oh, here's another one. Anthony Hebert to everyone. Could community development block grant funds be used as a project match? You know, this came up before, and I don't know the answer to this, but I'm glad to look into it. Somebody else said that they thought that CDBG, like the ag funding, is matchable against federal grants. So I don't know, but shoot me an email, and you know, if this is what you're considering using as match, I'll be glad to look into it. And I think that's it for chat questions. So if anybody would like to turn on their microphone, they're welcome to. And I'll just give that a minute. Hearing none and seeing no more chats, I'm going to close this meeting. It's just exactly an hour, so that was pretty great. And but let me just say again, feel free to send me an email, and I'll be glad to discuss any of this information further with you. And I definitely encourage you to check out snepgrants.org, and you should be able to link to quite a bit of supplementary information there. And so with that, I'll say good luck on your LOI. We're looking forward to reading them all. And I hope you have a great day.